Rural municipalities across Alberta own and operate most of the provincial roads, bridges, and utility systems. These are the assets that connect communities, move goods, and support the resource based and emerging industries that keep Alberta competitive. But for years, those same municipalities have been asked to do more with less, facing chronic underfunding, rising construction costs, aging infrastructure, and increasingly constrained budgets. Earlier this month, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta launched a brand new 5-week awareness and advocacy campaign called Closing the Gap, the Rural Infrastructure Funding Deficit. The goal is simple but urgent: to highlight the scale of the problem and push for practical, long-term solutions. As the RMA stated, it often surprises Albertans to learn that rural municipalities manage a larger infrastructure portfolio than even the provincial government itself. Yet these municipalities are being stretched to maintain aging systems, while also preparing for new industrial and economic opportunities that await. The campaign builds on the RMA's 2024 Rural Municipal Infrastructure Deficit Project, which used an innovative methodology to assess infrastructure conditions and funding needs. The findings were stark: a rural infrastructure deficit of more than $17 billion in 2023, projected to climb past $25 billion in 2025 without provincial intervention. Now, over the coming weeks, Closing the Gap will explore the economic impacts of deteriorating infrastructure, the growing burden on rural taxpayers, and the need for fair, predictable provincial funding. It also outlines RMA's recommendations for Budget 2026, including short-term stabilization funding, long-term funding reform, and improved provincial-wide asset management. And today on Municipal Affairs, we are sitting down with the Rural Municipalities of Alberta President Kara Westerlund to learn more about the campaign, why it matters now, and what RMA hopes to achieve both in the short term to stabilize rural infrastructure and in the long term to build a more sustainable, predictable funding model for communities all across Alberta. This is Municipal Affairs. In the heart of every thriving community lies a well-crafted strategic plan. But crafting such a plan requires expertise, experience, and a deep understanding of local needs. Enter Strategic Steps, your partner in municipal strategic planning. Strategic Steps' team of experts have years of experience in municipal administration. At Strategic Steps, they just don't develop plans. They co-create homegrown strategies tailored to your unique community. They listen, they collaborate, they empower your community to thrive. Contact Strategic Steps today and take the first step towards a brighter future for your municipality. Call Strategic Steps at 780-416-9255 or visit strategicsteps.ca to get started. President, thank you so much for sitting down with me today and talking about the most recent campaign announcement from the Rural Municipalities of Alberta around closing the gap. Now, what led the Rural Municipalities of Alberta to decide that now was the right time to launch a campaign like this rather than continuing on to address infrastructure funding through regular advocacy channels?
Well, I'll be cheesy starting this off. There is no time like the present to get on this. So we did put out to our members back in 2024 the call out for the information, the data that we needed to formulate the report. And we put the call out asking for the information to come back. And we've compiled all the information and have things organized in a report that's available on our website. And we decided to open the 2026 year with a campaign and a push towards trying to, quote unquote, close the gap.
Now, this campaign is starting with a 5-week campaign, which is going to take us into proverbially the Alberta provincial budget, which is expected to be at the end of February, beginning of March. I'm not sure of the exact date right now. But what does this campaign hope to achieve when it comes to that provincial municipal relationship in 2026?
So the point of the campaign is to create awareness about the infrastructure deficit in rural Alberta, not only with the provincial government, but with our residents too as well. And the other piece to this as well is we see it as a opportunity to invest in rural Alberta. As we know, we're part of the economic engine that drives this province and that drives this country. So we're being very positive about it. I know it's a very big number. We're looking at $17 billion, and then we took the numbers and extrapolated out into 2026, and it's closer to 25 billion. But what we're really trying to achieve and accomplish is a seat at the table for with the province. How we're going to sit down and really get a handle of this. So obviously, we'll be looking for some short-term investment and some short-term cash injections. But the big part of this too, as well, is we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this overnight either. So we really need to sit down and focus on having those the dialogue and the opportunity to come together. Just not the municipal affairs ministry, but we're talking infrastructure, we're talking economic corridors. We're talking finance too, as well, needs to be at the table and look at some long-term solutions on how we're going to get a handle on this issue.
That report that you've mentioned, the Rural Municipal Infrastructure Deficit Project, put that dollar figure, as you said, at $17 billion in 2023 to 25 billion in 2026. How important was it to quantify the deficit that municipalities are faced with in 2026 in that way? And how has that data changed the conversation in the early days of the campaign, do you believe?
So we realized that the combined data wasn't there. So that's why we put out our call directly to our members to get the information so that we could compile the information moving forward. I'm not sure if we quite expected the number to be as high as it is, but here we are. It is quite significant. And I think what we're going to be focusing on is trying to look at the plans, figure out how we're going to fit in with the province's plans and financial future too as well. We hear, and the province has been great. They're talking about stirring economic prosperity in all regions of the province, and it's great to talk about that. It's great to do have a great working relationship with industry, whether it's oil and gas, forestry, tourism, and agriculture. But this is like the non-sexy side of things. We're talking about bridges, we're talking about culverts, we're talking about roads, and people are probably already rolling their eyes because it's boring to talk about. But it's so important and so critical for what we do. We don't see a problem until all of a sudden your roads shut down because we had a culvert collapse and now we don't have the money to fix it. We don't hear from residents. We hear from them when they go to turn their taps on and they don't turn on, or when you try to flush the toilet. It's so critical and so key. Infrastructure, and it's the type of infrastructure I think we take for granted every day.
Now, I was recently just chatting with one of your fellow colleagues earlier today, literally earlier this morning, Josh Bishop, the Reeve of the County of Wetaskiwin, and we were talking about this campaign, but we were also talking about the context of the infrastructure challenges the County of Wetaskiwin. I'm just picking on him because him and I just chatted recently. There is a bridge issue in the county of Wetaskiwin, and he didn't say blatantly, but he kind of put it this way: if we have five bridges and we only have enough funding for three bridges, we have to decide what of those two bridges we have to close down because we just don't have the infrastructure to fix the money to fix the issue. So when it comes to those quote unquote unsexy things, it is sexy when you are driving across the bridge and the bridge is still there. How do you get people to change that narrative to say to themselves, bridges, roads are actually important? Because you're right. We are more reactive in 2026 than being proactive. So how does this campaign address getting Albertans on the side of rural municipalities to address proactive issues rather than reactive?
Simply put, it's just having the conversation, talking with yourself today, creating the awareness, and providing the information, the factual information and the numbers. People are blown away to find out that the rural municipalities of Alberta manage approximately 75% of Alberta's bridges. Now, like, that's massive, and then put that into context that we represent 85% of the land mass, but yet less than 15% of the population. Those are, staggering figures, and it's something that we eat and have to deal with every day. The other piece to that too is we look after 135,000 kilometers of road. Like, it's just mind blowing to think about that. And the other piece to that too is 30% of the water and wastewater systems in this province are also on our landscape. And again, trying to deal with these issues and deal with this infrastructure is even further coupled and made complex by the fact that we've got less than 15% of the population. And the other piece to this too is, well, agriculture, oil and gas industry, and forestry. I'm sorry, but it's not happening in your backyard. If you live in Edmonton, or if you live in Calgary, if you live in Grand Prairie, it happens in my backyard. So it's hard to people to understand that concept. I drive through Calgary and I don't see a pump jack in your backyard, but I'm sitting here at my kitchen table and I can look out, across my backyard, and guess what I have in my backyard? A pump jack. And those industries use our infrastructure too as well. So it's really hard when you're trying to educate people, for them just to truly wrap their heads around what we're talking about. Because when you drive in the city of Edmonton, and say for instance there's a bridge that's out, you might have to drive a block or two, but you can detour fairly easy. Might add 15, 20 minutes to your commute. A bridge or a culvert goes out in our community, and you could be adding hours onto people's commutes trying to get in and around, and adding tens of or hundreds of kilometers trying to get and reroute, not only residents but industry too as well. So I think just trying to spread their message, having these types of conversations, and continuing to push the importance of it.
One of the
It also
big
helps. Oh yeah, sorry. It also helps what happened in the city of Calgary. I mean, we quote unquote, we did not plan for this to happen and bring out this campaign. But right before Christmas and through the holidays, look what happened in Calgary. We had 1 million people out without water. The unfortunate part of that is we have water outages in outside of the cities all the time. And we have these type of, main breaks and in issues in communities, but you just don't get the splashy headlines when your community is 8,000 people, or, you're only affecting 20 or 30 residents. So there's that difficulty to overcome too as well.
$1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, $17 billion, now $25 billion. That's a lot of money. And I could not get through this interview without asking you the financial question. People are struggling. Where do you want to see this money come from? Because at the end of the day, there's only one taxpayer, and there's going to have to be someone who pays for it. How do you see the province or federal government paying for these infrastructure challenges and close that gap?
Absolutely. And I know there's been comments made out there. That's what property tax is for, just raise your property tax. But again, I've highlighted, I'm not sure how many times in this interview, but I'm going to highlight it again. 85% of the landmass, less than 15% of the population. This is something that municipalities cannot property tax their way out of. Quite frankly, I pay taxes in my municipality, and I'm a landowner as well. You could triple, quadruple people's property taxes and still not tackle this issue. And I think that's really important to highlight, because that's some of the feedback that we're getting. We absolutely need the help of the province. We absolutely need the help of the federal government. And we need the help of industry too as well, that also utilize this important and key infrastructure too as well. But we definitely cannot property tax our way out of this.
So you kind of played in it for a bit, but your statement there just makes me kind of also want to refocus the question a little bit onto this. Why should someone, and I know this is going to be a very political question, but why should someone from Calgary care one iota what is going on in Brazeau County, in the MD of Peace around bridges? There will be some who will listen to this who say, I don't use those bridges. Why should I have to pay for the issues that are in your community? You fix it, it's your community. It's not like your money is coming to the city of Calgary to address their water prices. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's a difficult one because, I don't want to point fingers back, but I mean, we very well can. I don't use Calgary Transit. I don't use City of Edmonton Transit. I don't use transit, period, anywhere in this province. And we know that there's billions of dollars of taxpayers' money going to fund that type of infrastructure. I think a big piece of this too is we produce about 28% of this province's GDP. And you hear me use the analogy, and I'll use it here again today. We have a pipeline of liquid gold leaving our communities, and we have a garden hole trickle that comes back. That's just the reality of it. And absolutely, I sit here and I'm kind of turning around and pointing fingers back. It's not what I'm trying to accomplish. I understand needs and complexity in each community is different. We're just asking for a bit of that piece of that pie has to come back. And at the end of the day, we're all Albertans. And at some point I'm going to be in the city, and some point I'm probably, I'm going to turn the tap on whether I'm visiting Edmonton or Calgary. The same thing with, our residents in Edmonton and Calgary and other communities. You absolutely are going to tell me that you don't drive outside the city to go, camping or utilize the tourism that's outside of the cities. I think pretty much every Albertan, we're pretty mobile. We do move around. We go into each other's communities, and I don't also want to take away from those important, very city-based infrastructure projects to fund ours. And I think, we're incredibly resilient and smart people. If we sat down at the table, got our heads together, I think we can figure out a path forward.
Looking at the role that council and administration has to play when you have a deficit of over $25 billion, how has, in your opinion, as president of RMA, how has council and administration worked to make trade-offs when it comes to underfunding of infrastructure with the realities that are on the ground? Because there are things that municipalities have to push off because they can't afford it. And as this number increasingly grows, more and more municipalities, councilors, reeves, mayors are looking at how do we afford this while still offering those services that we need to supply to our residents.
Yeah, and I think there's communities having those really difficult conversations already in January. Most of our interim budgets are set for the 2026 year, with final approval coming in the April timeframe. Absolutely, they're talking about potentially property tax increases. They're talking about service level cuts. Because if you're not willing to touch the property tax side of stuff, you have to figure out where the money is going to come from. And those difficult decisions are happening, each and every day around our council tables. The other piece to this is, exactly what you said, and you talked about, you've got 5 bridges, but you've got funding for 3. So you look at the engineering reports, you talk with your residents, and, be frank and open and say, we only have funding for 3. Which 3 are going to get done, and you try and base that on factual information that you get from the engineers and the professionals that look after this. It's difficult, absolutely difficult, and those conversations and those difficult decisions are going to continue. Um, at the end of the day, I understand we didn't get here overnight. We don't expect the province to come up with a solution overnight, but we really need to sit down and focus on some long-term sustainable programs, and sustainable outcomes. Or you are, potentially going to have municipalities, frankly, go bankrupt. And at the same time, and that I've heard that again, oh, well, the municipality is already in enough trouble. It'll just fall down, and the surrounding municipalities are going to absorb that. But the surrounding municipalities are also in a financial crunch, and they're also facing, massive infrastructure issues and funding too as well. So, the simple solution isn't also just to let them, go bankrupt and fold, and then allow the surrounding communities to pick it up, because you're just going to make the problem even bigger.
Looking at the aging infrastructure part of this campaign, there's another side of this campaign that we often overlook. And at the beginning of the interview, I asked you, why do the campaign now? You said, why not now? Because why not? The best time to start something is today. Well, the best time to solve an issue was yesterday.
Great.
And with that, that means if we don't start yesterday, the cost of doing a project tomorrow is going to be higher than it was yesterday. How has cost escalations affected municipalities' ability to plan, prioritize, and deliver these infrastructure projects that are critical to the survival and potentially the long-term viability of their communities?
Great question. I can give you examples of where we've got funding shortfalls. The numbers look great, and you'll see this big splashy headlines. There's tens of millions of dollars for this program or $100 million for this program. So I'll narrow it down and focus on the province and their water and wastewater funding. It significantly dropped. It dropped from $85 million in 2023 to $33 million in 2025. That's a massive drop, like massive. Rural municipalities received less than 20% of the water wastewater funding, despite managing about 30% of the water wastewater infrastructure in this program. Here's another one, the local government fiscal framework, which is the funding program that replaced the municipal sustainability initiative program. It provides infrastructure funding at 20% below historical MSI averages. I happened to be at the table when those negotiations were going on. Same thing. We were very loud and clear and pushing back hard because we knew the type of funding cuts we were going to get. So 20% below the historical MSI averages. And that is before accounting for the high inflationary pressures, as well as the increases in construction and other costs over the past few years. So, I mean, the tariff war that's happening, it's just, further made the cost, climb. Here's another example. In budget of 2025, funding for the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program, which is our STIP in our world, it decreased by $44 million in 2024, 2025 to $33 million in 2025 and into this year. And it's going to stay low. They're predicting only $39 million in 2026 going into 2027. So again, there's a cut, another massive funding cut to our infrastructure programs. Haven't picked on the federal government yet, so how about I do that?
Well, and I was going to say that because that was literally the next line of questions I was going to ask. Because while we traditionally think of municipalities being quote unquote, and I know I'm going to get anger from this, and I feel like if the former president of RMA was listening to us now, I'd be getting a stern talking to, that municipalities are creatures of the province, are subservient to the province. I feel like Paul McLaughlin's yelling at the screen if he's watching this right now as I say that. What role does the federal government have to play in this? Because we are in this new era of municipal, provincial, federal collaboration. Where does the federal government need to step in to address some of this shortfall as well?
Well, here's a prime example where they're falling short too as well. So the rural municipalities receive only 17% of Alberta's federal Canada Community Building Fund allocations. I mean, that's pitiful. 17% of that's Canada Building Fund coming out to rural Alberta. When you and I both know, we are a significant driver to the GDP not only in Alberta but this country as well. Again, forestry, oil and gas sector, agriculture, and tourism play a huge part in all of this. And I often tell people when we deal with municipalities and we're doing our budgeting, a few things that are staunchly different than the provincial and the federal governments. We deal in the dollars. So I am personally responsible for every dollar right down to the cent. The province we deal in the millions when we're looking at our budgets. The province and the federal government are in the billions, and they bring in the money too as well. Where do they get that money? They get it from my backyard. They get it from rural Alberta, and again, we're just asking for some of that money to come back. The garden hose trickle that has been flowing back to these communities is just not sufficient, and it's not manageable any longer.
So the key theme for the Closing the Gap campaign is fairness and predictability in funding. In practicality, what would a more predictable funding model mean for municipalities across rural Alberta?
It would look like guarantees. So I spoke of earlier about the cuts to a number of projects or to another number of the programs, whether it's LGFF or STIP funding. When you announce a program and there's a dollar figure in there, we need that dollar figure not for what to last for 1 to 2 years, 3 years. We need to start looking at long-term funding promises and guarantees. I'm going to be careful with that. Guarantees so that as municipalities are building out how they're going to manage that, we know in year 5 what type of funding is coming. We're not going to be left wondering where it's coming from, or even if we're going to get that. This year-to-year budgeting is just, it's not working, and cannot continue, especially when we're dealing on the infrastructure side of stuff. So we do need to have those conversations around the table of what that's going to look like and how we're going to achieve that. And we are asking for guaranteed, predictable, long-term funding.
But with that, and this is another part of the campaign that I just want to quickly play in, the campaign also emphasizes better data through province-wide condition asset strategy. Why is consistent, shared data so important from a policy and accountability standpoint and a potential funding standpoint?
Well, it's so important. The devil is always in the detail, and we know that. And we understand that, and we need to make sure, we've learned from a little bit from the past too, is, as soon as, my numbers don't match exactly what the numbers are in a certain ministry in the provincial government. Well, oh, well, we can't deal with this because we don't know where your numbers come from. And, I question where their numbers come from. I don't want to get bogged down into to nitpicking that apart. But again, that's where that call comes from, about having the consistent reporting and the consistent numbers and the consistent policy around this, so that we are very comfortable with the numbers that we're dealing with. Quite frankly, I could pick up the phone right now, phone my office, get a hold of my corporate services department, and ask very pointed questions right down to the cent. I think that's a little difficult when you're in the provincial government, trying to get down to the exact cent or the exact dollars when you're dealing with things. So it's going to be key and critical because, it's great to have this grandiose policy or an overarching, agreement or, ideology, but the devil is in the details 100% when we deal this. And we need to make sure we're consistent across the board with it too, as well.
Earlier on in the conversation, we talked about the provincial budget that's going to be tabled at the end of February, beginning of March, whenever that date will be. As the province prepares for that budget, what specific signals are you, President of RMA, looking for from this government to ensure that what you were saying, what you were screaming, and not being rude about it, but you're being respectful about it at the end of the day, that you get a clear indication, a clear signal that they're actually willing to work with RMA, but also willing to take this issue seriously? What are you looking for?
So we're hoping for a seat at the table, sit down, work directly with the ministries that are affected with this. Obviously, finance being top and foremost of that. Everybody's quick to jump in that we need to, we need to talk with municipal affairs, and we need to talk with infrastructure. We need to talk with economic corridors. We need a seat at the table with Treasury. To hammer out a solid plan going forward. In the short term, and I've said this and I'll say it again, we're not going to solve this overnight. It didn't come overnight. But that being said, and there's that big but in there, we need to look at some short-term cash infusions in the current budget that's going to be coming out and announced shortly. And there's some easy low-hanging fruit, top up LGFF funding. You can top up the STIP funding. There was a few years there where there was funding and there was no funding in some of these programs too as well. And that's the other thing, is we've been kicking the can so far down the road. We've ran out of road.
You've ran out of road, but it is a new year and we have to be a little bit optimistic. What does success look like for RMA at the end of 2026 to ensure that you look back and say, we did what we needed to do and we're better off at the end of 2026 than we were on January 19th when we're recording this?
I think the big one is I'm going to be chewing my cabbage twice here, but looking at some of that short-term infusion into the programs that I talked about. There's the water, wastewater ones too as well. That we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We do have three great programs that are running. The short cash injection would be incredibly helpful. And the other piece to this is we need to be having conversations and sitting down at a table, meeting at the legislature and working through what this is going to look like. Because I don't want to come back here a year from now having the same conversation with you. I got a little bit of deja vu with the unpaid oil and gas taxes right now, but let's not go down there today.
That will be in March when it comes out. President, I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Always a pleasure to sit down and chat with you. I feel like this is not the last time you and I have this conversation over the next 12 months. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to your viewers and your listeners as well.
Thanks for tuning in for another edition of Municipal Affairs, the show where we take a closer look at the people, the policies, and the practical decisions shaping local governments across Canada. Now, each episode is designed to dig beneath the headlines and bring forward real conversations about the challenges and, yes, opportunities facing municipalities of all sizes in every province and territory. Now, if today's discussion was useful or even thought-provoking, we encourage you to subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with your colleagues, councillors, mayors, reeves, and any municipal-minded member who cares about strong local governance. Visit crossbordernetwork.ca to learn how you can join a future episode of Municipal Affairs and contribute to the national conversation about municipal issues. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we will be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly.